So now that we've completed page 1, we need to move on and obviously add in our additional pages on Lucidpress. Unlike other platforms such as InDesign, where you set that up at the time of creating your project, you can basically do that within Lucidpress by just scrolling down, and then you'll always see the option of being able to add in extra ones. If you're within InDesign, you need to actually go to Pages, and then you'll have the option to add additional pages at that point if you've not done it when you've been initially setting up your project. So now I've got my full spread here. What I do want to do is actually add in my main columns and things as well, so it makes actually designing the work itself a little bit easier in terms of my alignment. So to do that, what I'm looking to do is just come up to the insert option here, and we're looking for guides. So as default within Lucidpress, certainly what you actually get up is 3 rows and 3 columns. And based on the design that we're going for today, I'm going to leave that as my default, because I'm fairly happy with that, and that I'm going to be quite secure in that that's going to help me actually produce better work in terms of alignment. So I'm just going to select OK and leave it at that for the moment. And then the next thing that I want to make sure that I've done is actually just get my page numbers in here before I'm likely to forget. So for people within InDesign, refer back to what we did last week in terms of using your master pages to insert your page numbers. But for people that are working within Lucidpress, we just again need to use the option for insert. Always make sure before you do that, in fact, that you are selected on a page. And then what we're doing is just coming to page number, and you have a few options: on page, header, or in footer. I'm going to go for footer on this occasion and just place it there. Now that we've set up the complete guides that we need to actually produce the rest of our work, it's now time to actually get our content on here. So to do that, I'm going to actually start on page 2 and getting everything formatted. So what we are looking to actually utilise in here is 4 main images. We're going to also have some text which we're going to wrap around one of the images as well, and we'll have a main heading. So to start us off, we're going to create some shapes so that we can get these images in. So to do that, again, I'm just coming over here to the shapes icon here, and I'm going to be using squares on this occasion. And we're actually going to use the area here that's actually been provided to us through the use of adding in the columns and guides here. And that's going to just help give us a little bit of structure here for completing this as well. So here I've got one box. If I just kind of stop it here around about the footer area, and again I'm just going to repeat that for them. I could go back and create a new shape again using the icons here, or what I could do is again on a Mac using this options key, and I could actually just drag, and that will help me create a new one there altogether. On a PC, that is likely to be the key for Alt, but I don't use PC myself very often, so don't quote me on that. So again, I've just repeated that process again. And note, one of the things that I am looking at is when I long press this, I can actually see a guide here in terms of the gap between the 2 bits of spaces here. So it says it's 0.378. So again, if I just go and long press that here, we can see if we can kind of get this pretty close in terms of the distance between each of them. Ideally, you want it to be exact, so it might well mean that I might need to tweak this one here, E7, so that's the same. So yeah, so that's telling us that they're all equal in terms of their proportions, and that's exactly what we're looking for. But one of the things for me I'm not a fan of is having borders around my images, so I'm going to make sure that I take off the border option. So if that's something that annoys you, I suggest that you take that off, especially if we're going for an exact replica here. So now that I've got that off, I'm going to basically select my first box, and then that will allow me to basically bring in my first image. So with that selected, again I'm coming back over to the fill area within Lucidpress and using the image tool and choosing the image to bring that in. And our first image for this particular one, we're going to use this one on a boat, and I'm going to insert. Again, within InDesign, that would obviously be a case of you using the rectangular tool and then file and place. So I've got my first image in here. Again, we may decide to tweak things, but for the moment we'll just get them all in here and see how it's all looking. So again, I'm just going over to fill and navigating to image and changing the image here as well. And for this one, it's just basically named as unnamed image. It's an aerial view of somewhere that looks fairly nice to visit. And then our third image, again, is just an image of a girl on holiday by the looks of it, doing some travelling. And again, for some reason, they've not got any name attached to these images. Unnamed image is what they've got it listed as. So I've got my 3 images inserted within the page, so I'm quite happy with that. And the next step that I want to have is essentially getting in my main body of text before I put in my final image here. So to do that, similar to InDesign again, I'm using just my type tool, and on this occasion I'm going to use the body text option that we get here automatically. And then I'm just going to bring it over. I would actually personally like to leave, a little slither of white space here as well. So I'm just going to drag it out till we've kind of got to the bottom here. Again, just like InDesign, if you don't quite get it spot on, we will have an option to basically tweak this at another point. And again, what I could do is I could just, use the controls that we used earlier, being Alt or Option, and dragging it over so we get kind of an exact replica copy of it. And again, I'm just going to check that these actually match in terms of their heights. 3094, 384. So we're kind of almost there. And again, always using the guides, the measurements I can see at the top of the page there to make sure that we're matching. But it's not the end of the world if it's not matching right now, because again, we will get the opportunity to fix this anyway before we finish. And sometimes it's actually easier once you do have some content in here. So again, we're going to use Lorem Ipsum as a tool here. Again, just because it's not coming from a real article, this is just for the sake of demonstrations and obviously practice essentially on how to actually design and start formulating your pages. So within Lucidpress, to get your placeholder text, just make sure that you're actually within the area here and come into Insert, and we've got Fill with Placeholder Text there as well. I'm going to highlight it all before I really move forward any, just so that I can actually look at my fonts for a body font. So I can obviously scroll through these and I can kind of get a little bit of a preview as to what ones we actually have here. So feel free, depending on what platform you're actually using, to change it. You might find one that's slightly better. I'm still deciding on which one I want to actually use, so let's have a wee look. Okay, so I'm going to choose this railway one, and again, because for normal body type, it's usually around 11 or 12 is the standard font size basically for that. So I'm going to go for that. The other thing that I can do here is I can see that I've got overset text. Again, similar to InDesign where it comes up with a plus sign and then you can then take that overset text into the next column. You can do something similar here, so we could just simply grab and drag and that should take over any remaining text. To be fair, there wasn't very much actually remaining there, but it shows you how you can at least do that. So again, I'm just going to repeat that process so that I can fill this one with some text as well. And for the moment, I'm going to sort of leave that as it is just for the moment until we kind of move forward on to the next part. What we're going to do next is basically look at putting in a drop cap here. And this is where it is very different to using InDesign, because InDesign actually has that feature, whereas unfortunately Lucidpress does not. So it means that you need to find an alternative method on how to do it. So all we're going to do is basically copy the first word of our sort of paragraph here. I'm going to delete it off for the moment, and I'm just going to come across and basically create a new body text box here. And I'm just going to simply paste it in there. Again, I'm going to highlight it, make sure that I'm on the correct fonts that I chose to use. And I'm just going to have to manually increase this until it reaches a point where I believe that will work well for a drop cap. And again, this will vary depending on the actual font that you ended up choosing itself. So the measurements and the points that I've come up with here of 38 might not work for everybody depending on your platform and what font you've actually chosen. So that may be something that we need to, or you need to come back to. So now that I've placed that in, it's there, but I can see that we need to do some adjustments here and some refinement of the paragraphs itself. So again, what I'm going to do is make sure that I'm just sort of double clicked within the actual body text itself and come over to the end of that, and then that should allow us to start manipulating that by using some of the options that we actually have for typography. And again, it might be a case where you need to just try a few different things until you find the best thing that's actually going to work for yourself. So some of the options that we have here is we could try just shifting left. Only problem is we can see that it actually seems to move absolutely everything. So really we don't want to kind of move absolutely everything. But what we can do is say first line. That could have potentially worked if we then just again go back to the main text itself, and perhaps we just need to tweak it and move it around a little bit. And again, if I just go back in there to the main body text, I should be able to tweak that ever so slightly again, just until we get it to a point where we think it's looking just about right for a drop cap. So I'm fairly happy with it just at that point. Again, as we add more information onto the page, we may actually find ourselves having to tweak this again. But for the moment, I'm going to leave it as it is, and I'm going to move on to adding in our last image here, and then we're going to wrap that text again. So for my last image, I want to use the circular shape. So again, within InDesign and other platforms, you will still have the option, usually on the left-hand side, to add additional types of shapes. Within Lucidpress, and again most platforms, if you hold down Shift whilst you drag this out to make it bigger, it will retain its shape rather than going a wee bit off. So I'm quite happy at my image there. I don't want it to be too overbearing, obviously. I'm going to just place it in the centre of here as well. I could have had it either side or up the top, but for now I'm going to actually place it just in the centre here. And again, I might use the intersections here. So now that it's here, and then again within Lucidpress, I'm going to fill and navigate into images. Again, within InDesign, that's file in place for yourself. So our image here for this one is the one that's basically a shape of a globe. That file name comes under is while visiting. And I'm just going to insert. Again, if I really wanted to, I could obviously go to the crop option and just tweak the composition ever so slightly, but at the moment I'm going to leave it as it is. Now, obviously it's obscuring our text, so again that's where we will have to wrap our text. So to do that, make sure that you are actually highlighted on the object itself, and I'm coming down to the layout within Lucidpress, and that's when we're basically going to have the text wrapping options. But I'm going to go back to this one, wrap text around the object, and then what we're going to do is basically tweak things from there. So I'm going to make sure that I select that tick box for wrap tight to shape boundary. And then we also have other options here if we wanted to refine this ever so slightly as well. You can see the changes that occur, will affect how tight or how much white space is actually generated between them as well. So again, it will depend on the size of your box that you've managed to draw in, the font and different things like that. So it will really just be a case of you manipulating it and playing with it and seeing what actually is going to work best for yourself. So I'm going to leave mine just at that for the moment, but what I do notice from making these tweaks again is that, you know, this made up drop cap from this is shifted somewhat, so I'm going to have to again just look at kind of fixing this somehow. And the word that we had previously was lorem, so I'm keen to kind of still utilise that. So I'm just going to take this section out by cutting it at the moment, and I'm going to just take out that L so that I can then move things around a little bit so that I can basically get that back in again. So to do that, again, I'm probably going to have to come over to my text area and start tweaking things again to make sure that I'm getting this exactly how I want it to actually look. So I could use padding, but as you can see, that actually moves the entire box, which again isn't what we wanted to do. What we were really looking to do was simply just move the first line. So again, using your options, just to experiment and try out different things until you've actually got it just as you intended here. So I'm just going to look at some of the text indent options that we actually have here. And again, this will just depend on things like, you know, the font that you've actually chosen and different options like that. So it may take a little bit of refining, and this is kind of the problem of having the restrictions of a platform that is free and doesn't allow natively for drop caps. So you're forever manipulating and things like that. But, you know, we can't really complain when it comes to getting a free platform at the end of the day. So I'm just going to spend a wee bit of time refining this before we move on to the next section. Alright, so now that I have tweaked some of my fonts and my paragraphing within this page, I'm now ready to move on to the main heading. But I thought I would let you know how we basically solved the problem of the drop cap. As you know, we're not able to, unfortunately, within Lucidpress itself to create drop caps, which would make life a lot easier. We obviously had to add in an extra text box to obviously add that in, increase the size of it to a point where we were fairly happy with how it looked. But that can obviously cause some issues in terms of formatting. So to solve that, I basically used the options that you've got here within Lucidpress itself, made sure that I was in the main column itself, and highlighted and double clicked in there. And then the options that worked for me personally was using the area under here for tabs and indents, and I used the first line option. And based on the font size and the font that I personally have used, that worked at 0.292 inches. But again, depending on how you formatted yours and what font you've ended up going with, depending on your platform, that may vary ever so slightly, so just be aware of that. So now we're going to add heading here, just to kind of finish things off. So again, I'm going to use the type tool. I'm going to go for headings, and we want to kind of give this a heading essentially. A random one that I've thought of is out of this world is what we're going to do, but we're going to do it over 2 boxes essentially. So now that I've got the main information in there, again, as always, we just need to make sure that we highlight it. And because this is my main heading, I'm going to use a different font to what I've got in the main body. And I'm going to go back to the chunk 5 that we used for page 1. But what I need to do is obviously get the correct size in here. And I'm going to go for 56, I think. So it doesn't have exactly 56 in Lucidpress, so we'll get it as close as possible, and then we can just increase it in small bits. But I don't really want black. I am going to go for a nice blue colour, since blue represents travel. So I'm going to get this into position. I'm going to tighten up this box as well a little bit. Okay, so I'm okay there. But what I do want to do is obviously again make sure that I'm central to the columns that I actually have here. So I want to place this box within the centre of the two of them for the first half of this. And then the last word as part of my main heading to be put in is world. Whoops, not doing very well today. Okay, so we've got world there. We need to again highlight it, make sure we get our fonts and the font size correct here as well. So I'm just going to rush on and do that. And again, obviously because of the size of it and the size of the box, that needs increased. Again, making sure that I'm highlighted and also change my colour here. And now I'm just going to grab my box and get it a bit closer over before I align everything up. And again, I'm just making sure that this box is nice and sort of tight here as well. And then I'm just again using the centre points of my actual columns here, the intersections, to make sure that things are aligned as I would like. So I could leave it here, I could use it here to kind of make it a little bit asymmetrical. But for me, I want to kind of have it quite fairly well lined up with the top line here. Again, if I wanted to double check this, I could just use the ruler to pull out a guide just to make sure that I have got it accurate. Yeah, and that's looking fairly accurate there, so I'm kind of happy with page 2. So we'll move on to page 3.